Good afternoon. Thank you for coming. I also want to thank Nick for the introduction and pointing out that I've been teaching for a long time. In fact, about 40 years. And throughout that whole time, I've been working both locally and across the state and across the nation and other countries to improve our public schools and others also private schools. And yet, I think I might say a few things that are a little bit contentious. If I was the kind of person that got discouraged, I would be getting discouraged now about the state of our education system. Because I'm very concerned about our obsession with standardized tests and standardized test scores. And I run into teachers every day, just yesterday afternoon in my office, who's saying, now we're getting scripted lessons, and they might as well hire a robot to teach my class. And so people are not going into the profession to the degree they were before, and a lot of people are thinking of diving out of the profession. And so I'm very concerned about that, particularly because people think that the test scores are objective. And what I want to do is argue that, in fact, the test scores are misleading and erroneous, and they should not be believed. And in fact, I would say it would be great if I could tell you, don't believe anything the state don't believe anything the state education department tells you. Well, maybe some things. But we should not be elated when test scores go up or dismayed when they go down because we really have no idea what they mean. So let me give you just a few examples. I could go on for days, but I won't. But many of you know, if you're from New York, you may know that in 1990s, New York State, actually that's not the example I want to give you first. The example I want to give you first is we just had the Common Core state exams based on the Common Core state standards that were in the spring. And one of the things that happened is the exams were based on the Common Core curriculum, but unfortunately, most schools did not have the curriculum. And it also makes the assumption that, like on math, if you're taking the Math 8 test in the Common Core, that you're taking the previous 7 years, which of course you couldn't. And so in New York State, 31% of the students who took the exam passed or were proficient. In some urban schools, like the Rochester City School District, only 5% of the students passed the exam. So this might sound like a very bad thing. So I was curious what to make of this. And so I looked to see what Commissioner King, he's the Commissioner of Education, said, and in response to these test scores, and he said 31% chance, 30% passing was a good thing. Now, it doesn't sound good, but he said it's a good thing. And then he said, well, it provides us with a baseline. Now, if you're familiar with New York State, we've been giving standardized tests, well, for decades and decades, and we've been using them to assess students and determine whether they graduate, et cetera, for several decades. And it says, like, what? Can't we use those tests for a baseline? Why is this test that comes now a baseline? Secondly, it seemed to me that if only 30% of the students are passing the test, and this is after 20 years of school reform in New York State, focusing on standards and tests, isn't this really an indictment of this last 20 years of school reform in New York State? And should we be doing something different that engages students and in their community, is more interdisciplinary, et cetera? So I have questions for Commissioner King. I also have questions for Mayor Bloomberg in New York City. So over the last 20 years, Mayor Bloomberg, well, he hasn't been mayor for 20 years, it feels like it, but he's run on re-election. It's mayoral control of schools in New York City. So he runs the schools, he appoints the board members, he can get rid of them on a whim, and he's taken credit over the years for any increase in test scores, and that says, well, I should be re-elected. Look, my policies are working, re-elect me. So I was curious. So what does he say about, in New York City, they didn't have a 31% passing rate, they had 26% on literacy and 30% on math. So what's his response to those scores? And he says, it's wonderful news. Now, how is 26% passing wonderful news? This seems to me like the ultimate spin. So when the test scores go up, the mayor says, my policies are working. When the test scores go down, he says, this is wonderful news. It makes me wonder what world we live in, and is he looking at the same figures I am? So let me talk about why we should question the scores and give you some examples, which is the example I was going to give you a minute ago, is some of you who are in New York State may know that in the 1990s, we started requiring that students pass 5 Regents exams in order to graduate from high school. And one of those exams had to be in science. And so the exam most students took was the Living Environments exam. And Commissioner Mills, I'm going to pick on all the commissioners before I'm done. No. So Commissioner Mills thought he wanted to set the cut score. Now, like when I was a kid, 65 was passing, and that meant you had to get 65% of the questions right. But in fact, it isn't the way the scoring works for the tests in New York State. And so they changed the cut score up and down, and they made it so you only had to get 39% of the questions right to pass the exam. And this was good news for the commissioner because then he would get students would pass, students would graduate, and he wouldn't have a large dropout rate, and nobody would blame the commissioner for having a large dropout rate. So that worked, except that people said, this is really misleading because, in fact, they're making the test so easy. It's so easy to pass. And so then the physics exam, he said, well, I'm going to take the physics exam, and I'm going to make that hard. And so what he did is he got 8 people together, and he said, set the cut score really high so we get a high failure rate. This is all in the New York Times, so I can find evidence for this. But they didn't set it high enough and so he threw them out of the room and got 4 people back. And he said, set the cut score high so we have a high failure rate. And they didn't set it high enough, so then he got 1 person in the room and said, set the cut score high so we have a high failure rate. And that person did. And in fact, that year we had 39% of students taking the physics exam failed. Now, it didn't bother him, and he thought, well, nobody would mind because they didn't need it to graduate from high school, but these were students who were taking physics in order to go on to university. And so they said, it's not really a good thing when you're applying to an Ivy League school, say, and that you got a 70 on the physics exam or that you failed. And in fact, students had lower results on the state exam than on the advanced placement exam. So they criticized the commissioner, and he said, no, this is objective, but there was enough people protesting that finally he reneged and changed the score, and all of a sudden students passed. I find this just remarkable. So, what happened the same thing happens in the primary grades. So we have an annual test around math and literacy, and for years the scores have been going up. And Mayor Bloomberg is pleased with it. But when I talk to superintendents, they say, we didn't do anything different, and our scores keep on getting better. We're not getting better kids, so how do we explain this? Well, the way you explain it is, in fact, the state keeps on increasing, lowering the cut score, making more students do well, and everybody looks good. Finally, Chancellor Meryl Tisch, and this was just last year, said that the scores are ridiculously inflated and nobody should believe them. So I told you earlier, you shouldn't believe the scores. The chancellor says don't believe the scores. And what she did is she rescaled them down and cut them by about 1/3. And all of us, kids go to bed at night saying, I passed the test, and then they get up in the morning and find out they failed the test because the commissioner changed the whole scoring system. I don't know about you, but this strikes me as insane, just to be blunt. And so what I'm concerned about is what effect this has on our schools. I'm running out of time. So, we just had, I need to talk about Governor Cuomo just for a minute, because we had these poor test results, 5% passing in Rochester, and Governor Cuomo says they're going to suffer the death penalty. I love the way we talk about schools. They're going to suffer the death penalty. What does that mean? Well, he's going to close the school. He's going to close the school boards and let New York State Education Department run the schools. Now, I know enough about Albany not to think that Albany could run schools any better than we can locally. But that's his plan. And in fact, Commissioner, I'm not forgetting the current commissioner's name, but said he's pushing a bill through the legislature to get that to happen. And the chancellor is working with him on that. But the chancellor and the commissioner both promised that next year the test results will be better. Now, how can they promise the test results will be better? They can change the cut score. So I will bet you 100 to 1, next year the test results will be better because they're going to jigger them to be whatever they want. last 10 seconds. There are really great things going on in education. I've worked with the Performance Consortium schools here in Rochester, also in New York City. We have great models of what to do. They don't give standardized tests. In Finland, the country that scores the highest on international comparisons, we know they only give a test when the students graduate, like our college boards or SAT, and they give a sample of the test to students over time just to see how the country's doing over time, but nobody gets an individual score. It has no implications for schools or teachers or students. We are a test-mad country, and I'm over time. And I just heard today there was a meeting with Commissioner King, the names came back with the PTA, and they're raising questions, and the commissioner said, I will no longer meet with PTAs about standardized testing. And that just came out this morning. So my last statement is, we need good schools. I need people to look at what's going on, to realize that the test scores aren't objective, and they're being misused and harming students and teachers and families, and thank you very much.